You can take away everything people see on the outside, but you cannot take away the truth of who someone is. The room became quiet when Elena Carter stopped explaining herself. She simply stood there, calm and composed, while the people around her believed they already understood her story. The officers looked at the situation in front of them and thought they knew exactly who she was. They saw a black woman in a difficult moment, but they did not see the years of service, the compassion, and the strength that had shaped her life. In that cold room, surrounded by people who believed they had the upper hand, Elena carried something they did not expect. She carried dignity. The officers exchanged confident looks as they continued treating the moment like something ordinary. To them, Elena was just another person they had already judged. They did not know the woman standing in front of them had spent years helping families, supporting her community, and giving hope to people who felt forgotten. They did not know that many people respected her not because of a title, but because of the kindness she showed when nobody was watching. Elena did not raise her voice. She did not try to prove her importance. She did not demand recognition. Instead, she watched carefully and waited. There was something about her silence that made the atmosphere feel different. It was not the silence of fear. It was the silence of someone who understood that the truth would eventually speak for itself. Officer James Whitaker stood nearby, confident in his experience and his position. After years in public service, he believed he could read situations quickly. He believed he understood people by their actions, their words, and their circumstances. But in that moment, he was looking at only one small part of Elena's story. He did not see the community leader. He did not see the woman who had dedicated years of her life to helping others. He only saw what he expected to see. Outside the building, the city continued moving as usual. Cars passed along the streets, people walked through their daily routines, and no one knew that inside that room, a powerful lesson about judgment and humanity was unfolding. Elena remembered something she had learned long ago. People often reveal themselves most clearly when they believe they have power over someone else. She knew she could not control their assumptions. She could only control her own response. So she remained steady. She held on to her character. She refused to let someone else's misunderstanding define her. The officers believed they were witnessing a moment where they had authority. They did not realize they were standing in front of a person whose strength came from something far greater than a position or a badge. They thought they were judging Elena Carter. They did not know that soon, the truth would turn the situation around, and the person they underestimated would become the one teaching them the most important lesson they had learned in years. Before anyone knew her name, before anyone understood the work she had done, Elena Carter was simply a woman who believed every person deserved to be treated with dignity. Long before that difficult day, her life had been built around helping others. She lived in a quiet neighborhood where people knew her not because she demanded attention, but because she was always willing to offer support when someone needed it. Every morning, Elena walked into the community center with the same purpose she had carried for years. She listened to families facing challenges, helped organize local programs, and connected people with resources that could make their lives better. She never looked for recognition. She believed that meaningful work was often done in moments that nobody noticed. The walls of the community center held countless stories of people who had found encouragement because Elena chose to show up. There were parents who needed guidance, young people searching for opportunities, and neighbors who simply needed someone to believe in them. To Elena, every person mattered. Her leadership was not built on a powerful position or a public title. It was built on trust. She understood that real influence came from the relationships a person created and the kindness they showed when there was nothing to gain. Her friends often described her as someone who carried calmness into every room. When problems appeared, she did not rush to blame others. She looked for solutions. When people disagreed, she searched for understanding. That was the person Elena had always been. The same patience that helped her community was the patience she carried into the room with the officers. She knew that people could misunderstand what they did not know. She also knew that anger rarely opened the door to change. Her strength came from choosing a different response. Meanwhile, Officer James Whitaker had never met Elena before that day. He knew nothing about her years of service or the people whose lives she had influenced. He only saw a situation in front of him and believed his first impression was enough. What he did not understand was that every person he encountered had a history beyond the moment he could see. Elena's story was filled with quiet victories, small acts of compassion, and countless examples of choosing humanity over judgment. She had spent years teaching others that a person's value was not measured by appearance, circumstances, or assumptions. It was measured by character. As the hours moved closer to the moment when her path crossed with James, Elena continued carrying the same confidence she had always carried. She did not know exactly how the situation would unfold, but she trusted the values that guided her life. She knew that respect was not something given only when people agreed with you. Respect was something every person deserved from the beginning. And while others were preparing to judge her based on a single moment, Elena Carter walked forward knowing that her entire life was larger than anyone's first impression. Officer James Whitaker had spent years believing that experience gave him the ability to understand people quickly. Every day he faced different situations that required him to make decisions, follow procedures, and maintain order. Over time he developed confidence in his instincts. He believed that his years of service allowed him to recognize problems before they became bigger. But sometimes confidence can create a blind spot. Sometimes a person can become so certain of what they see that they stop looking deeper. James was respected by many of his colleagues. He was known as someone who took his responsibilities seriously and believed strongly in doing his job correctly. His uniform represented authority, and he carried that responsibility with pride. However, behind that confidence was a habit that he had not fully recognized. He often made quick judgments based on the information available in front of him. He did not always stop to consider the parts of a person's story that were hidden from view. On the day he encountered Elena Carter, James did not know anything about her background. He did not know about the community program she had helped build. He did not know about the families who trusted her. He did not know about the years she had spent creating opportunities for people who needed support. To him, she was only someone connected to a difficult situation. That limited view shaped the way he approached her. Around him, other officers shared the same confidence. They believed they understood what was happening because they saw only one version of the story. Their conversations reflected certainty, but that certainty was based on incomplete information. They focused on what was visible while ignoring everything that could not be seen immediately. Meanwhile, Elena remained calm. Her quiet behavior did not match the image they had created in their minds. She did not react with anger or desperation. She simply carried herself with a level of confidence that made some people uncomfortable. There was a reason for that. Elena knew who she was. She did not need strangers to confirm her worth because she had spent years proving it through her actions. James noticed her calmness, but he did not yet understand what it meant. He interpreted the situation through his own assumptions instead of considering another possibility. Perhaps there was more to Elena's story than he knew. Perhaps the person standing in front of him was not who he believed her to be. But at that moment those thoughts had not fully reached him. The room remained divided between appearance and reality. On one side was a group of people who believed they understood the situation. On the other side was a woman who knew that the truth could not be measured by a single moment. James believed he was judging Elena based on facts. He did not realize he was judging her based on only a fraction of the truth. And soon, the information he had never considered would force him to see everything differently. The room grew quieter as the moment continued, and Elena Carter remained exactly the same person she had always been. She stood with patience not because the situation was easy, but because she understood something that others had forgotten. A person's character was revealed not only by how they acted when they were respected, but also by how they responded when they were misunderstood. The officers around her expected frustration. They expected an emotional reaction. Instead, they saw a woman who refused to allow the situation to change who she was. Elena's calm presence created a contrast that became impossible to ignore. The more they expected her to break under the pressure of their assumptions, the more they noticed her confidence. She was not trying to prove she was important. She was simply refusing to surrender her dignity. Officer James Whitaker observed her carefully. At first, he believed her silence meant she had nothing to say. But as the minutes passed, he began noticing details that did not fit the story he had created. Elena spoke respectfully. She answered questions clearly. She treated everyone around her with the same level of courtesy, even though she was not receiving the same in return. For the first time, James began to wonder if he had misunderstood the situation. It was only a small thought, but it was the beginning of a different perspective. He had always believed that good judgment came from experience. Now he was beginning to understand that experience without empathy could still lead to mistakes. Outside the room, the world continued moving. People walked through the streets, businesses continued their daily routines, and the city remained unaware of the important lesson unfolding inside. But within that room, something had started to change. The confidence of the officers was slowly being replaced by uncertainty. Not because Elena demanded it, but because her actions challenged their assumptions. She showed them something they did not expect. Strength did not always look like confrontation. Sometimes strength looked like patience. Sometimes it looked like staying respectful when others failed to show respect. Elena remembered every person who had helped shape her journey. She remembered the families who trusted her, the community members who shared their struggles with her, and the people who taught her that compassion could create change. Those memories gave her the ability to remain steady. She was not standing there because she believed she was better than anyone else. She was standing there because she knew every person deserved to be seen as more than a single moment. James looked at Elena differently now. He still did not know the full story, but he could sense that there was something missing from his understanding. The woman in front of him did not match the assumptions he had made. There was a quiet confidence about her that came from years of purpose and service. The situation had not changed yet, but the way he saw it had started to shift. And sometimes, the first step toward the truth is simply realizing that you may not know everything. The tension inside the room continued, but something important had changed. The officers still held their positions of authority, but the confidence they carried earlier was beginning to weaken. Elena Carter remained calm, and that calmness became the strongest statement in the entire room. She did not need to raise her voice to be heard. She did not need to demand respect to deserve it. Her actions were already showing the kind of person she was. Officer James Whitaker watched her closely, trying to understand why the situation felt different from others he had experienced. He had handled many difficult moments throughout his career, but this one stayed in his mind because Elena did not respond the way he expected. She was not defensive. She was not trying to create conflict. She was simply standing with the same confidence she carried throughout her life. As James looked around the room, he started noticing the reactions of the people nearby. Some appeared uncomfortable with the way Elena was being viewed. Others seemed to recognize something about her that the officers had not yet discovered. There was a quiet respect surrounding her, even in a moment where others were failing to see her clearly. James began thinking about how quickly assumptions could form. A person could look at one moment in someone's life and believe they understood the entire story. But a single moment was never the complete picture. Elena's life was made of thousands of moments that no one in that room knew about. They did not know about the evenings she spent helping local families. They did not know about the meetings where she worked to create better opportunities for young people. They did not know about the countless times she supported others without expecting anything in return. All they knew was what they saw in front of them, and what they saw was incomplete. Elena noticed the change in the atmosphere, but she did not let it affect her. She understood that people sometimes needed time before they could recognize the truth. She had experienced moments before when people underestimated her, but she had learned that the best response was not always proving someone wrong immediately. Sometimes the strongest response was allowing consistent character to speak louder than assumptions. James thought about his own decisions and the way he approached people every day. He had always believed that fairness meant following facts. But now he questioned whether he had been looking at all the facts or only the ones that appeared first. The realization was uncomfortable, but it was necessary. Growth rarely began with feeling certain. It often began with admitting there was something more to learn. The room remained quiet, but the meaning of that silence had changed. Earlier, it represented a situation where Elena was being judged. Now, it represented a moment where others were beginning to question their own judgment. She had not changed the situation by force. She had changed it by remaining true to herself. And as James continued watching her, he began to understand that the person he thought needed to be judged might actually be the person who had the greatest lesson to teach. The room finally became quiet enough for Elena Carter to hear her own thoughts. After everything that had happened, she found herself alone for a brief moment, away from the voices, the assumptions, and the judgment that had surrounded her. The hallway outside was still, with soft light passing through the windows and creating long shadows across the floor. For the first time that day, Elena allowed herself to pause and reflect. She knew moments like this were never only about one person. They were about the choices people made when they believed they had power over someone else. Elena had faced difficult situations before. She understood that some people formed opinions without knowing the full story. She understood that appearances could sometimes become a barrier between people. But she also knew that every misunderstanding created an opportunity for someone to learn something new. She looked back on the years she had spent serving her community. She remembered the people who had encouraged her when she first started helping others. She remembered the families who trusted her, the young people who looked to her for guidance, and the neighbors who knew her not because of a title, but because of the way she treated them. Those memories reminded her that her value was never determined by the opinions of strangers. It was built through years of compassion and commitment. Across the building, Officer James Whitaker was experiencing his own moment of reflection. The confidence he carried earlier had been replaced by questions. He replayed the situation in his mind and began noticing things he had ignored before. He realized how quickly he had created a picture of Elena without knowing her story. He realized that experience alone did not guarantee understanding. Sometimes, the person with the most authority in the room was also the person who needed to listen the most. James stood quietly, thinking about the responsibility that came with his position. He had always believed that serving people meant making decisions quickly and confidently. Now he was beginning to understand that true service also required humility. It required taking time to see people as individuals instead of situations to manage. The silence around them carried a different meaning now. It was no longer a silence filled with judgment. It was a silence where reflection could happen. Elena did not know exactly what James was thinking, and she did not need to. She had already chosen the kind of person she wanted to be. She would continue showing patience even when others did not. She would continue offering respect even when it was not immediately returned. Outside, the city continued moving through another ordinary day. Cars passed by, people walked along the sidewalks, and life continued as usual. But inside that building, something important had shifted. Two people who had entered the moment with completely different perspectives were beginning to understand the same truth. A person could never be fully known by a single circumstance. Every face carried a history. Every person carried a story. And sometimes, the quietest person in the room was the one who had the most powerful message to share. The moment of truth arrived quietly, not with a dramatic announcement, but with a simple conversation that changed everything. After the events inside the building, Officer James Whitaker received information that revealed the part of Elena Carter's life he had never taken the time to see. A community representative who had worked with Elena for years explained the impact she had made. He described the programs she helped create, the families she supported, and the countless hours she spent improving the lives of people around her. James listened carefully, and every detail added another piece to the story he thought he already understood. The woman he had judged so quickly was not someone without influence or purpose. She was a respected community advocate whose work had touched many lives. The realization was not easy for James to accept. He thought about how certain he had been earlier. He thought about the assumptions he had made before knowing the truth. The most difficult part was not discovering that Elena had an important role. The most difficult part was realizing that she should never have needed a title or a position to deserve basic respect. Elena had shown her character from the beginning. She had remained patient, respectful, and composed even when others had not offered her the same consideration. That was the truth James had failed to recognize. Nearby, Elena continued speaking with people who knew her well. She did not seek attention after the situation changed. She did not use the moment to make others feel embarrassed. She simply continued being the person she had always been. Her strength came from consistency, not from proving that others were wrong. James watched her and began to understand a lesson that went deeper than the situation itself. Authority was not only about having a position. Leadership was not only about giving instructions. Real leadership came from responsibility, empathy, and the ability to recognize the humanity of others. The realization changed the way James viewed the entire encounter. He understood that he had focused on what he saw instead of what he did not know. He had looked at a single moment and believed it represented an entire person. But Elena's story proved that every person was much larger than the circumstances surrounding them. The room felt different now. The same place where assumptions had once controlled the atmosphere was now filled with reflection. The officers who had been so confident earlier had become quieter, not because they were forced to be, but because they were beginning to understand. Elena noticed the change but did not celebrate it. She knew the purpose of the moment was not to make someone feel defeated. The purpose was to create awareness and encourage growth. When James finally approached her, his expression showed humility instead of certainty. He acknowledged that he had not understood the full situation, and that he had allowed assumptions to influence his judgment. Elena listened with the same patience she had shown from the beginning. She understood that recognition of a mistake was the first step toward becoming better. In that moment, the balance of the room changed completely. The person others had underestimated became the person who inspired reflection. And the people who believed they were judging her discovered that the greatest lesson was the one they needed to learn themselves. The days after that moment brought a quiet transformation that no one could have predicted at the beginning. There were no dramatic speeches or public celebrations. Instead, the change appeared through small choices, thoughtful conversations, and a new understanding between people who once viewed the world from completely different perspectives. For Elena Carter, life continued in the same way it always had. She returned to the community work that had defined her for years. She attended meetings, listened to residents, and continued helping people who needed support. She did not allow the experience to change her into someone who sought recognition. Elena never measured her value by how others reacted to her. She already knew who she was. Her purpose came from serving others, not from receiving approval. The situation had reminded her of something she believed deeply. People often reveal their greatest strength when they choose kindness during moments when kindness is the hardest choice. Officer James Whitaker also carried the memory with him. The encounter stayed in his thoughts because it challenged the way he had always viewed his role. He had spent years believing that being a good officer meant making quick decisions and trusting his instincts. But Elena showed him that responsibility required more than confidence. It required humility. It required the willingness to admit that there could always be more to learn. Over the following weeks, James began approaching his daily interactions differently. He took more time to listen before making conclusions. He reminded himself that every person had a history that could not be understood in a single moment. The change was not about becoming a completely different person overnight. It was about becoming more aware of the impact of his choices. One afternoon, James attended a community meeting where Elena was speaking about improving communication between residents and local services. This time he entered the room with a different mindset. He no longer saw Elena as someone connected to a difficult situation. He saw her as a person whose work represented the kind of trust every community needed. As Elena spoke, James noticed the respect people had for her. They listened because they believed in her. They trusted her because she had spent years showing them that their voices mattered. Her influence did not come from demanding attention. It came from consistency, compassion, and genuine care. After the meeting, James approached Elena. His words were simple, but they carried meaning. He thanked her for the patience she had shown and acknowledged that the experience had changed the way he viewed his responsibilities. Elena listened and accepted his honesty. She did not remind him of his mistake or use the moment to make him feel smaller. Instead, she told him that recognizing a mistake was an important part of growth. She explained that everyone had moments when they could learn something new about themselves. James understood that her response reflected the same strength she had shown from the beginning. She had every reason to hold on to anger, but she chose understanding. She had every reason to seek revenge, but she chose compassion. That choice was what made her powerful. The lesson stayed with James because he realized that true accountability was not about feeling defeated. It was about becoming better. And through Elena's example, he discovered that the strongest people were often those who had the ability to remain kind even when others had forgotten to be. Time passed, but the lesson created by Elena Carter continued to remain with everyone who had witnessed that day. The building, the room, and the circumstances became part of a memory, but the meaning behind the moment reached far beyond that single experience. It became a reminder that people were never defined by one situation, one appearance, or one assumption made by someone who did not know their story. Elena returned to the work that had always mattered to her. She continued walking through her community with the same purpose she had carried for years. She met with families, supported local programs, and encouraged people who needed someone to believe in them. Nothing about her changed because of what happened. She did not become stronger because others finally recognized her. She had always carried strength within herself. The only difference was that more people had finally seen it. For Elena, the greatest victory was not proving someone wrong. It was showing that dignity could survive even when people failed to recognize it at first. She believed that every person deserved the opportunity to be understood, and she continued living by that belief every day. Officer James Whitaker also moved forward, but he carried a different perspective than before. The experience changed the way he approached his responsibilities. He still valued his role and the importance of making decisions, but he learned that responsibility required more than authority. It required compassion. It required patience. It required seeing people as individuals instead of judging them through incomplete information. James understood that the easiest thing to do was make assumptions. The harder and more meaningful choice was to listen. Months later, when he spoke with members of the community, he noticed the difference in the way he approached conversations. He gave people more time to explain their experiences. He reminded himself that every person carried a story that might never be visible at first glance. The lesson Elena taught him became part of the way he served others. It was not a lesson about one person being right and another person being wrong. It was a lesson about growth. It was about recognizing that everyone had the ability to learn and become better. On another quiet afternoon, Elena walked past the community center where so many important moments had taken place. The sunlight reflected through the windows, and the sounds of the neighborhood moved around her. People greeted her with familiar smiles because they knew the person she had always been. She continued forward without needing attention, because her purpose had never depended on recognition. A short distance away, James looked across the community and understood something he would remember for the rest of his life. True authority was not measured by a position, a uniform, or the ability to make others listen. True authority came from the way a person treated others when they had the opportunity to choose kindness or judgment. The world often moves quickly, and people often make decisions based on what they see first. But Elena's story showed that every person was more than a first impression. Every person carried a history, a purpose, and a value that deserved to be discovered. As the day ended, the community center lights slowly turned on, the streets became quieter, and Elena continued her journey with the same grace she had shown from the beginning. The moment that once seemed unfair became a reminder of something powerful. Kindness was never a weakness. It was the strength that changed the people who were willing to see it.